So I'm very pleased to be able to welcome here tonight Anthony Edwards. Anthony first joined the club in 1955. It wasn't immediately when he joined the university that he came up. He spent the first year rowing.
Wasted.
Yeah, on the sport. He did quite well. He won kind of a couple of awards in that first year. He didn't like being told what to do like the men at the end of the day. So he came up and discovered the gliding club. And by 1969 he became its chairman, and by 1977 he became its president, and he held that post until the CUGC and CUGC had a change. So a long period of history, and to which I shall now sit in awe at some of his experiences from his life.
We should welcome Alan Wells from the intake of 1948, who trumps me by quite a handsome margin. So he'll be able to correct me when I'm speculating on what was happening in 1948 and thereabouts. So what I'd like to do is, well, first thing I'd like to do is to remind you that what I actually offered to do was to talk about CUGC viewed through my logbooks. And why I wanted to do that is because I've quite often over the years given a talk about the club's history. And of course I've got that all pat. But time has passed and I've now become part of the history. So it seemed to me that it would be more interesting if I was just to try and describe what flying in Cambridge was like for us undergraduates when we came up. John Brennan here will remember the time very well. So let me start by saying that I'm going to be a bit autobiographical, but there's no sense in which I want to just say what I was doing. I want to describe what I was doing because it's what we were all doing at that time. And I will produce the names of some of my friends, one of whom, Peter Bullman, came to see us yesterday as a matter of fact, so we all still know each other. And then, when I've done that, if you're still awake, I'm going to show you some pictures. But it's not the sort of talk where I want to interlead it with pictures, because then you end up just by telling people what's on the picture, on the screen, and that's not a very satisfactory way to convey what the club was like in the old days. Now, the club has a very substantial archive. We're very fortunate like that, and it's quite important nationally, because when the club was formed in 1935, it very rapidly became one of the best known clubs in the country. And I don't know what the archives are like of the Dunstable Club, the London Gliding Club, or the Midland Gliding Club, or Yorkshire Gliding Club. These are ones which were our contemporaries, more or less, but they cannot possibly be as good as our archive. We've got a complete set of minute books and of the club itself, the minute books of the Cambridge University Gliding Trust Limited, which was a holding company. These go back right to the beginning. We know exactly when the club started. We have flying records in a wonderful book called The Notable Flights Book, which was started in 1937, which contains a fantastic amount of information as to how people were enjoying themselves in those days before the war. And my goodness, they did enjoy themselves. That archive lives in my house in Bolton and is open to inspection. It contains some material from before the war as well as the minute books. Most of the material is post-war, and what we've kept is all the membership forms, and we've kept things like the daily flying books where the flying was recorded and the treasurer tried to work out how much everybody owed and then sent out bills, because the club was run on credit in those days, much to the disadvantage of the club, of course. So all that information has been retained, and I have far more photographs than I'm ever going to be able to digitise. So one of the reasons for the particular selection I'll be showing is that they're the only ones I've got around to digitising. So there's plenty of work to be done there. that is just a piece of wallpaper. It's actually nothing much to do with what I'm going to talk about, but it's just a very pretty picture. It's my Slingsby swallow with my daughter in it over Thirlmere, photographed by her brother, who was in a mosquito about 2,000 feet further off, I think. It looks very much as though she's going to land in Thirlmere, but I can assure you that she didn't. I'm showing that picture now because I think that I'm the little boy on the wingtip. When I was a youngster, I had an enormous mop of black hair. I could be identified absolutely anywhere. This is a photograph of the Cranach, the two-seater, which Alan Wales will remember, and you presumably flew in. So he can tell us what it was like to fly in it, which I can't. But my brother, John, came up to Trinity Hall in 1947, and he was soon involved in the Guiding Club, became its secretary, and in 1949, which was his third year, I came up from London to visit him. Now I will have been 13, and I don't remember too much about it, except that I was on the airfield, Marshall's airfield. The airfield had no runway in those days, and the task for the day was to take out this wonderful Cranach two-seater, which was owned by Ray Slazenger, one of the founders of the club in 1935, and to fly it. And I'm apparently allowed to hold a wingtip. What I most remember about that day was nothing to do with the gliding at all. It was that as a 13-year-old, I simply took a number 9 bus from where we lived in Mortlake to Liverpool Street to catch the train to Cambridge. And although I knew that the bus was going to go to Liverpool Street, somehow I got a bit confused, so I got off about half a mile early. It was a Sunday. There weren't many people around in the city. So I had to find somebody to ask, and I was standing by a red traffic light when a chap came along on a motorbike. So, of course, no helmet, so it was possible to talk to motorcyclists in those days. And I said to him, could you please tell me where Liverpool Street is? He said, oh yes, hop on. So, the 13-year-old just hopped on, and I was taken to Liverpool Street. But people don't do that sort of thing anymore. It was a great time.
That's right.
Now I noticed, since I still get the club's emails, that there was very, very little flying this winter. And I thought to myself, we had great problems at Marshall's over a wet field. It was not just that it was wet, it was sufficiently wet for the Marshall's authorities to say we couldn't fly on it. Now, of course, we argued about what sufficiently wet meant, but they had a whip hand. But that didn't stop us flying. We used to do what we called peritrap retrieving. We were using a winch, of course. We would use just a single cable, and we would pull it out with the tractor on the peritrap, and we would launch off a single cable, and then we would do it again and again and again. There was no problem about vehicles on the grass because we didn't have any vehicles. We'd all come out on our bicycles, so there weren't any vehicles anyway. There was a winch, and there was a tractor, and there was Bluebell, and then perhaps somebody was about to go solo or something, or had just recently been solo, so we might take a prefect out. So all the handling on the field was indeed handling, was all by hand. But that didn't stop us flying. We had other ways of keeping flying when marshals wouldn't let us. We would simply decamp to another airfield. I don't know if anybody thinks about doing that now, but if it was too wet to fly at our airfield, we would pack everything into trailers, and we would ask if we could go to one of the other airfields round about. My logbook tells me that we flew at Waterbeach. I don't know what the RAF was doing at Waterbeach in those days, but they let us fly. It would have been a weekend, of course. We went to fly at Gravely, And generally speaking, nothing would stop us flying our gliders. Certainly not a couple of months of wet weather.
Greatly resorted to, I think, wasn't it?
Well, of course, some of the time we would water in those places, so we might not take the wind. But it did seem to me rather a pity that we didn't get any flying this winter, because it hadn't occurred to anybody that you could do what we used to do. As a matter of fact, 1949 may have been my first appearance in the gliding club, and I do remember on that occasion one other thing, apart from going on a motorbike, and that is that the club had a new Olympia, and I was allowed to sit in it as it was towed back to the hangar at the end of the day. Now, when one got to the hangar, what was the Cambridge Club's hangar? Well, it was one of those old blister hangars in the corner at Marshall's, but what was most remarkable about it was that it had no doors to it. It had canvas curtains. I don't know if anybody's ever experienced an RAF hangar with canvas curtains, but of course they're extremely heavy, particularly when they're wet. And to get these wretched things to go up their guides at the end of a day's flying was a terrible sweat. In the end, after the period that I'm talking about, I think Morris Pleasance and Bryce Smith and a few other eager people put some doors instead of these terrible canvas curtains. The other extraordinary thing about that hangar was that it was also Ted Warner's workshop. He didn't have a workshop. He did all his repairs just at the end of the hangar. And in the corner of the hangar, there was a little hut constructed, which I imagine he locked at night to stop people nicking his tools. And that was how Ted started his employment with us. And he stayed. And the two people who were absolutely essential to the operation of the club when I joined it in 1955 were Ted Warner and John Pringle. Now, a word about John Pringle. John Pringle was a graduate student in 1935, and he, according to one of his obituaries, he had done some gliding or known about gliding in Ireland. And he'd been an undergraduate here for 3 years, and then he was on his first year of research. And he had some friends in Trinity, some of them quite wealthy, particularly Ray Slazenger, of the Slazenger sports goods manufacturers. And some of these friends had already got gliders themselves, notably Slazenger. And John Pringle somehow persuaded these people to come together to form the gliding club and to start the flying at Branston Lodge, just down the road here, in the corner by what until recently was the burnt out hotel, but I think it's being rebuilt at the moment, isn't it? So that's where the club started. So 1949 I appeared, disappeared again, reappeared in 1954. Now, I didn't come up to Cambridge until the autumn of 1954, but in the spring, my brother John, whom I've spoken of, and Pip Gaskell, who later became the librarian of Trinity, and David Clayton, who later had quite a distinguished career building winches, one of which we had here before we had the new one. That was the David Clayton winch, I think. They had arranged to go and stay with another member of the club called Bill Crease, who was running a hotel on the road that runs over the Clwyd Hills in North Wales. Bill was a keen glider pilot. I think he owned an Olympia. Anyway, he bought this hotel because he wanted to give up working for Rolls-Royce in Chester so that he could bungee out of somewhere in the morning when he felt like it. So he became a hotelier. And the chicken run to this hotel was capable of accommodating a glider launch, if you replaced the bungee crew by a vehicle and drove the vehicle off down the hill, then you could launch gliders from the chicken run. So the people I mentioned had decided that they were going to take the Clubs Olympia and have a camp there themselves in Bill Priest's hotel and bungee out of his chicken run. At the last moment, my brother had to withdraw because he got flu, so he asked if I'd go as crew instead. So in fact, my first contact with actual gliding in this gliding club was, very appropriately, an expedition to the hills where we bungeed the glider off. And that's what I really liked doing later on anyway. So I was indoctrinated into that very, very early on. You might ask whether we had a clubhouse. No, we had no clubhouse, but there was a former ammunition store close by the hangar of Marshall's, and I, with great enthusiasm, decided this ought to be a clubhouse. Empty, run down. So I asked the committee for some money so that I could make it waterproof. And they said, no, you can't have any money. We don't have that sort of thing around here. And so I then noticed that we had an awful lot of scrap metal on the site, mainly old winch cable. So I went to the scrap metal merchant, Rich, in Kilden's Lane, and I persuaded him to give me some money if he would take away all this scrap metal. So I then went to the committee and I said, look, I've got some money. I'm now going to spend it on creating a clubhouse. So they said, well, thank you very much, we really can't afford to do that sort of thing, so they took the money. But later on, of course, we started building more particularly. Ted was provided with a workshop in due course, but that was all very much later. The actual administration of the club is perhaps not something that's too exciting to talk about. We had committee meetings. I became assistant treasurer very, very quickly, so it was my responsibility to collect the money, which was always lacking, and most pilots always seem to be in debt to the club. So that wasn't a very nice job. Anyway, I was dragooned into being the